Hello, everyone. Welcome to Operational Insights, What Do You Mean? Presenting today, we have two of my favorite people, not just here at CityWorks, but anywhere, Dinora Sanchez and Billy Lang. Before we get started, I would like to share a few tips. To drop a comment or question, please go to the red Live Now button. This will open the session, where you can scroll to the bottom and click on Questions. There you may leave your question or comments for the presenters, and we will address those questions as time permits. If you are having technical difficulties, you can click the question mark at the bottom right-hand corner. This will give you a window with some ideas for troubleshooting. You may leave the session at any time by clicking the three-button menu in the upper right corner. Once you click there, there is a prompt to leave the meeting. This will push you back into the conference lobby. This is recommended over closing your browser because that will cause issues getting back into the lobby later on. Please visit our ratings and reviews module in our navigation bar, where you can write a review and rate the session. We encourage feedback so we can make adjustments. I'd also like to make a quick plug for our sponsors and exhibitors. Please go ahead and click on the expo hall, where you have the option to meet live with the sponsors and exhibitors that are supporting our conference this week. So I'm pleased to introduce Dinora Sanchez, who, besides being my eternal roommate at the Esri UC, she is the asset management subject matter expert for CityWorks. She also currently serves on APWA's Asset Management Knowledge Team and AWWA's Asset Management Committee. Previously, she was the Asset and Operations Manager at the City of Sugar Land's Public Works Department, responsible for the Corporate Asset Management Program, GIS-centric work order system, call center and customer service, and budgets. In addition to her Bachelor of Science from Mercyhurst University and her Master of Public Service and Administration from Texas A&M, she has also earned a certificate in asset management from the Institute of Asset Management. Then we have Billy Lang here as well. He's been with CityWorks since 2007. He is our solutions architect and leads the sales solution engineer team, which means he's now my boss. Like Dinora, he's also certified by the Institute of Asset Management. Billy brings 20 years of experience implementing enterprise GIS solutions for local governments. Through his role as solutions architect, he applies his product expertise by formulating web-based GIS-centric public asset management solutions for internal and external clients. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to our two presenters here today.
Well, thank you, Bridget. Always a pleasure seeing you. Thank you for that wonderful, what is that?
Introduction?
That's what that's called. Yeah, thanks. All right, so thank you so much to everyone for attending this session on Operational Insights. What do you mean? And really what we want to do with the session was break it down because we talk about operational insights a lot, but what exactly do we mean by it? What's the value that it could bring to the organization? And then show you some of the latest, right, Billy?
Yep.
Yep, that's it. All right.
That's right, Dinora.
So we're going to get started here. Let's see. All right. So obviously, as you're well versed by now, we have our safe harbor statement. We want to make sure that if we do talk about things that are still in the roadmap, that this is covered. This is all information purposes only, and it is not our commitment to deliver any material code or functionality. It should not be relied upon in making purchasing decisions. And so, just to cover ourselves, we are going to be discussing about some items of Operational Insights that actually were just recently released, but in case we venture off, which can happen if we're talking together. Yeah, so good luck. All right, so the agenda, we're gonna start out just very briefly with the vision of what Operational Insights what's the purpose of it, right? What's the value intended behind it? And then also these next two bullets, they may seem pretty vague, but it's actually kind of like this, really the story that we want to tell, the value that it can bring to your organization. So how you really start to incorporate risk, build those risk strategies with your GIS, but also then diving into the maintenance strategy, okay? And I know this is going to impact many more organizations, maybe are going to be ready to do the maintenance strategy part, but open your eyes to the possibilities, and then we're going to wrap up with questions. So real quick, just on the vision, I mean, Operational Insights has been out now for, I think, at least 3.5 years or so. And yeah, because it was after I started here, also finally put out first release. So yeah, time flies.
I thought it was longer, but I guess it was only 3 years.
Yeah. So the vision behind it is, and you've heard this from us before, you can identify and assess high-risk assets and establish that maintenance strategy to increase their lifespan. And so you've heard the high-risk side of it, right? And you can see those supporting items underneath this. So you can evaluate and identify risk. And we've talked about this many times in our various conferences, but you can also start to gauge the asset maintenance. And so we're going to start to dive into that just so you see how this relates to the greater, when it comes to an asset management program, what that really means. And I will be honest and full disclosure here that sometimes we haven't promoted that asset maintenance in terms of Operational Insights and really shown much of that, though it's been there from the first release. We also then want to show some of the latest stuff that was released actually now like almost more than a year ago, which was how we start to look at the different trajectories or what we call asset curves. And then obviously we're going to depend on our partner network. And so the ability with Operational Insights to not just push information out, but obviously anything of CityWorks, pulling that in and really taking this information and putting it into other locations to empower that.
Yeah, and now that asset strategies are in the software, being able to really understand the role the maintenance part plays in those strategies.
Exactly. So it all ties together. We just wanted to lay that out.
All right. So one of those of you that are already familiar with it, Operational Insights and or now becoming familiar with it, we often mention that the GIS, you use your GIS assets to drive your asset strategies. And your risk strategies. And we did that with, you add those attributes to your actual, whichever asset you're maintaining or you want to do a risk strategy for. This would expand the size of the table, size of the feature, size of the amount of attributes tracked on an asset. Well, realizing that can, you build out these tables and you build out these feature sets, it can, it's just not always the best practice. We've now incorporated the ability to take into account relationships, so related tables in your GIS to actually complete those strategies and to fill out those strategies. Additionally, you never really want to apply a strategy against all of the assets of one type because they're not all the same. And so one way to actually differentiate those assets is to incorporate a GIS search, so you can search it. So you can now, narrow down, I want to apply a specific strategy to this set of assets and a different strategy to another set of assets. And so we've added that functionality, and we'll take a look at that here. So here, we're going to go in Operational Insights and go ahead and pause it right here. So right now, we're looking at the asset strategy, and you can see over on the right, the asset strategy details. Now we've included the ability to add a default GIS search definition. Currently, this is an actual search which you would perform in Office. But as the software evolves, not in this current release, but in time, we will evolve that to using queries as well. But this is where, in this example here, we're looking at critical mains. And then, another differentiating factor here could be, you want to apply a specific strategy to, say, mains of a specific material type or size or whatnot, or location. So now you can really begin to query out those assets and then build risk profiles specific to those assets. Continue. So there you can see we have a number of different searches. And then over here, we're going to take a look at the risk factors. And go ahead and add a risk factor here. And what you're used to seeing is the GIS feature, again, water mains. But now in this example, we have a number of related tables. And again, this is looking at the impulse data coming from Trimble Unity. Now, these are daily outputs. It's not an aggregation of your assets or of your impulses, but there are ways you can aggregate that data outside of Insights if you wanted to do that. So here you can notice that we created this new risk factor from the related table, added it, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and look at another one that we created so we can see the values coming in this range. So there over on the right, you can see those factor ratings are being pulled directly from the related table and then used to help calculate the risk score.
Just continuing on from the general session today. Yeah, well, this next one, we want to talk about the maintenance strategy, and I really wanted to highlight this so that you actually saw the maintenance strategy in case it's been a while since you've seen this aspect of it. So we're still in operational insights here, but it's going to be the little wrench, and you can see here in the menu. It's we'll talk about this update in a bit, but I get to, once again, from the beginning, I've been able to do searches here on the maintenance strategy side, unlike the asset risk. But the history start date is the important part. It's not when you went live with CityWorks, but when you actually started to do maintenance against it, right? The reactive, the proactive side of it, because that's going to be very important in the calculation. I could set, you know, how often, what's the cyclical or the interval that I should be doing this type of work. In this case, I should be flushing those mains once a year. And I can add different weights if I have additional templates. Now, from the reactive side, very similar with the exception that rather than an interval, you're working off of a threshold. So in the lifetime of those assets, in this case, water mains, how many of those activities are you going to allow against it, right? And so you've seen this part before. One of the things before we go into this, I'm going to back this up a little bit because I wanted to spend a little time on this. And when you look at the proactive and the reactive template set up here in this configuration, what does that mean to you, to your organization? So each organization is going to have a standard operating procedure, right? You're going to have that documented, hopefully, and it's going to tell you, how many crew members should do something, or how often you should do preventive maintenance against certain assets, or if it's whether it's warranty information is being brought in of telling you, okay, you need, this is the, how many times you go and exercise this valve or so on. And part of that, it's even when you get that information, you have it documented, it's about the targets, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to hit those targets every time, whether it's over or under, but you need to at least have a target to know what you're aspiring to do, right?
And these maintenance strategies can also be influenced by not just what the recommended is, but what your available resources are to go ahead and maintain those assets. So maybe you don't have the resources available to actually hit the target. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be influence where your threshold is, what your how often you perform these activities.
Yeah, and so that's what it is, right? So from the very beginning with your SOP, you're going to have those targets, and that is not accounting for what personnel, what crew size, what resources you have. And so you may set those, and then what maintenance strategy does here is then you actually get to see, are you under maintaining, are you over maintaining your assets? And you at least can start to see those trends and make adjustments, right? Or if you need to go out and secure additional funding so that you can meet that. Obviously, so maybe fully funding that maintenance program may not be possible, but at least you can start to build a long-term program for that investment.
And it's also worth noting that these the results from these scores can be written to the GIS. So then you can also then start to use things like heat mapping and using different kinds of ArcGIS insights or dashboards to then visualize some of this data to kind of give you a little bit more idea of kind of looking at it and identifying where you might be over maintaining, under maintaining, and which being able to look at that from that map perspective, there might be a rationale for why you're over maintaining or under maintaining something, or outside influences, and this kind of can drive that decision making.
Yeah, and so the configuration, think about it this way: you're setting those targets. But the scores, the MSPU, the MSPO, the MSR, just alphabet soup names we throw around here, that's going to give you what your actual performance on that, right? Whether you're adhering to that strategy or not. And so when we go over, let me start this back up. So when we go to the analytics dashboard, also in Operational Insights, you get to see that breakdown. So obviously this is demo data. You won't see that great of a spread there, but majority of my assets are being under maintained, right? They're not meeting that minimum preventive maintenance standard.
You mean like sales guys aren't going up there and maintaining?
No, Bridget, we need more information there. But then you can also look at that MSR, right? And that overall reactive score also in comparison to your overall high risk. And so that's the level of information then that you can then start to see where those assets are. And what we haven't shown here is you can then select those here, highlight them on the map, and actually do maybe some inspections, some work orders,
And,
take care of them.
and to that system of action concept, you actually can take action from those and create work activities, follow-up inspections, follow on directly from right here inside of CBS. And it's
Billy.
on machine sites.
Billy, the system of action Lang. That's his new nickname. All right. So from the maintenance strategy, we want to take some time to really dive into an area that actually got released after our last conference, but we haven't. So last time we met, we did discuss this, but obviously we were still working through it. And now that it's released, we want to spend a little bit more time to actually discuss it. So we want to start out first with the concept of expected useful life. And if there's any of our great colleagues from Esri Canada watching this, thank you. So this is actually an article that I ran across, obviously after April 2020. So it was last summer or fall, and it just hit dead on as to what we've actually embarked on ourselves with operational insights and asset curves, and that's useful life. And there's certain connotations, right, to useful life, but different in the industry and in different organizations. But I thought this captured it really well. And so it's not a definite or physical threshold that can be measured in a lab. Rather, it reflects the level of risk decision makers are willing to take. And the acceptable level of risk will determine if it's a few years earlier or later. And that is what also how we had worked through asset curves when we were designing that. And it's actually, when you start looking at it, we're going to spend some time into some of the terminology on that. But right off the bat, notice it the way that that is stated. And then this disclaimer here that I want to make sure we capture. I know internally our staff knows this because I hammer on it a lot. But the disclaimer is asset curves are not deterioration curves, okay? And the latter tends to have an industry connotation to it. So asset curves are really taking in, yes, we factor in the maintenance side, but we also factor in the risk. And it goes back to like that explanation on the prior slide where it's really about factoring in the risk and the way we define it actually, if we go to the next one. So it does provide you 3 potential trajectories, and we'll get into what trajectories mean, of an asset's expected useful life as it traverses stage thresholds with business risk implications. Yeah, really wordy, right? But the last part is key. The last 3 words, maybe 4, because with, that preposition is important. With business risk implications. That means we are factoring risk. So you set up your asset risk strategy, like Billy said, now that we can take advantage of related data tables also. And then that's being factored in along with the maintenance scores that are being brought in. And so all those profiles, once again, we'll go through some of these specific words in the next slides, are you get to configure those because you're the one who knows your assets the best. You're the asset manager.
That flexibility is important because it's really, what your threshold is as an organization is going to depend on a lot of things, and those are decisions that you're going to be needing to make as an organization. And so, the flexibility that we provided here, I feel is important because that allows, whatever your defined risk threshold is, you get to decide.
Yeah, I feel like I keep creeping into the computer because I'm so excited. But and like I mentioned already, it's going to be dependent on VRE and MSPU. Those are going to be the 2 drivers in these. All right. So some of the terminology here. So curve, that's its profile through its trajectory and stages. Yes, we use words you don't know, but are defined later on to define that. And so here, when we go through each of these, the profile, and there's pictures on the next slide, so stay with me here. Profile is the factors from the maintenance strategy, right? It factors in the maintenance strategy and the score. So that MSPU we were talking about, and we simplified it so there's a default way to configure this below, average, or above. And then there's also trajectory where you can set basically different stages, right? And you have fast, average, slow, and then you have 5 stages for each. And then 100 to 0, it comes back to that idea of when is it at its lowest risk? And you'll see that as we actually look at the asset.
Is that the install date?
No, it's not, Billy. Thanks for the setup, buddy. It is not. And we'll talk about that also in the image when you cover that, because there's not a specific, I've gotten that question before, but that's not the way that it should be interpreted. That's not the purpose of it, yeah. And then the stage is the number of years within each phase. All right, so now let's put those words into pictures, right? And this was actually spurred by Billy. You can thank him for this, because I know internally we did some of this, but this really nails, it gets the point across.
Well, it helped me understand. It was one of those things, I've seen that slide and I've heard it a million times, but until I really ran through and understood it, I was having a problem kind of bringing the categories together with the curves, the different configurations, the different trajectories, and trying to figure out, okay, where am I at here? Which trajectory am I using? What's driving that? And so you can see in the upper right, the search results, you can see we've got an asset highlighted, and you can see its underperform score is 0.9, so it's in that it would be in the below category. And so that's where the trajectories are coming from. Right? And so we can then look up to our asset curves or our asset curve configurations, and that's what's driving the trajectory piece we see on the right. So again, as I asked Denora, that 100%, when it was the asset was at 100, this doesn't mean this asset was installed in 2010, but that's when it had its lowest risk profile at that point.
And that gets to move, right? That can move.
That can move.
It's not static.
Not at all based on the maintenance score.
If you mitigate any of that risk,
it's going to move that date. So don't be alarmed if that 100 doesn't align with the date that was installed, because it doesn't need to. It's just going to move.
right? And there are assets that are going to just naturally have a higher risk, and so they're going to be shortened up there at the beginning there. Yeah, so that's how each of these really line up. We're taking that maintenance score based on where it falls in that distribution of these maintenance categories. Show you automatically automatically you have to click on the curve icon, but then it's going to show you that respective asset curve and those trajectories. So fast, average, slow. One of the things we failed to capture in this screenshot was how you can hover over some of these points, those different stages, and it will show you the year there. And these, just like you were pointing out earlier, Billy, those can be written back to the GIS also.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the end years for each of these trajectories, the fast end year, the average end year, and the slow end year.
And the trajectory, the configurations are configurable.
Yep. And then, and so that's what these stages are here, right? You're going through and being able to configure those different stages, those years. Don't worry, you don't have to do the math. We do have a total here so that you can see that and adjust those as necessary also. And you can run this, and then if you're not satisfied with it, go back, update, reconfigure.
And since you can have GIS searches powering this, again, these different configurations can apply to different types of the same asset.
Correct, yeah. So you're not tied to just one overall profile or just overall configuration of asset curves for all your water mains or all your pavement or all your sewer gravity mains. You can go down and say, I want to set this one up for the assets that are on this maintenance strategy, that are this material, that are this install date, or so on.
That are in this geography, that are what?
And it's actually laying the foundation for what, one of the things that we continue to plan is, and that's why we have a safe harbor statement, cohort, right? Cohort asset or asset groups that we can then start to, based on the results that come out of this, start to plan and work with in other parts of the platform, like you saw this morning with, being able to drop it into OpEx and other areas. All right, so that's what we get into the output. So what we're trying to show here is that we're able to not only view the results on this calculation search space, it's been there from the beginning, but I wanted to point out, kind of weave in some of these enhancements. So we're able to now select individual results, which was not possible previously. I can highlight those, so about 134 gravity mains here, and so I can see all of them. Or if I then wanted to refine this and just select a few, so I can select one here. I can see that asset curve here. You can see it hovered and showed me 2029. And then, and then the asset detail is something new that's really exciting because we actually get to see the work history. And this is one of those areas that really you can't get there fast enough. Okay, so the asset details is a new item. There is that drop down here where we can actually, you have 3 options. You could look at the asset attributes. So if you want to look back and look at that condition score, if you're writing it back to the GIS from your inspections, you can also look at work orders in the work history, which we're seeing here. Can't talk today. Total costs, the overall, all those tallied up for that specific asset. So the calculation behind this is not just saying, well, I spent $700 on this work order, so it's all going to that asset. We've actually taken, the way that calculation is, it's divided among the number of assets to that work order. And the same thing for the total hours. So if you're going through this and saying, man, it's actually, you know, obviously $778 may not be that much, but when you're looking at these assets, you can say it's surpassing the threshold and that value is so large for you, maybe it's time to reconsider just ripping out that asset, or at least just considering that or evaluating that rehab option, right? And so we can then zoom in into a couple more. Here's the, you know, just being able to select a couple of those assets and create some work activity.
You're taking action right now.
I'm taking action. You see it's assigned to me. I may just modify that and send it off to your side. But now I can, you know, created that work order. And so that's the idea of that follow, right? Don't just take the scores, but let's get eyes on the assets part of that. It's almost like a QA/QC, right? Making sure that the asset does really merit progressing in that capital or evaluation process. So real quick, asset validation. I'll fly through these last 2 slides, but real quick, this actually we learned, thank you to our clients who helped us with this. We were working through some support cases and realized that we didn't have access to their GIS, and it was easier to incorporate this tool here. And you can actually use this tool, not even configure anything like in Operational Insights, but you can jump in there, run this validation, and it will spit out a list of any assets, in this case, like any duplicates, any that don't have a unique ID. And you can see I have a total of 11,482 mains here. 481 or 11,481 are valid, but there's 2 that are duplicates. This makes sense if you think about the math, because there's 2 and so they're sharing UID. So you could export that out CSV, give it over to your GIS guy, like me to Billy, and then they can clean it up. GIS guy or gal. Okay, so UI enhancements also, very minor if you haven't noticed it. We do have a new icon, OP to the power of I, Operational Insights. So now you won't get lost looking for that CI. The side menu, this is consistent with other places in our platform with Respond and Admin and all those. So you can customize those. We have display density. You can collapse that menu. And it also shows you the dependencies for those various. So here's on a light mode, what that looks like. And then that side menu, you can see that display density now available where you can choose. And then the panels, as you notice, slightly different UI here, just very small modifications. So with that, we're happy to take any questions that y'all may have. Anything from in terms of questions?
We did have a couple questions come in. One of them that I think is pretty relevant and that I hear often when talking to people about Operational Insights is, are operators able to update the asset rating? You know, condition, useful life, risk changes as the systems grows or is modified. So what kind of changes can you go back and make once you've implemented this?
Yeah, you want to take this one, Bill? Okay, all right. So the changes, you know, it's going to depend where you have that information. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing inspections, you're using the asset updates part of that inspection, and you've got to configure so that it writes back to the GIS. As you're making those changes, those are going to be there. And then it's up to you to decide when you want to rerun that calculation in Operational Insights, right? Now, if there's other updates that need to happen because we are dependent on the GIS, it just based on when you want to run that calculation and whatever is currently on that information at that point. Same thing on the maintenance strategy.
And one of the values that does get written to the GIS is the date you ran the calculation and the name of the
That's right.
calculation. So you're able to get that information. You can see right in the GIS when this was run, what calculation name it was, and so you'll be able to kind of track that too. So,
Forgot to mention, we did add that in the 2.1 response release with the asset curve, so that was a little easier to track.
but yeah,
Anything else?
Well, we're about at the end of our time here. We did have some other questions come through. I believe those will get all collected at the end and sent along to our presenters to be answered later on in a follow-up. Thank you both so much for your presentation today, and thank you to all of our attendees for following along with us.